So if we apply those ideas, the ideas of this part of the world, to another part of the world that's currently in war, Russia and Ukraine, from what you learned here, how do you think peace can be achieved in Ukraine?
Peace can be achieved any moment. It's motivation. In this case, it's just one person. Putin just needs to say, that's it. The Ukrainians, they don't demand anything from Russia. Just go home. That's the only thing they want. They don't want to conquer any bit of Russian territory. They don't want to change the regime in Moscow. Nothing. They just tell the Russians, go home. That's it. And of course, again, motivation. How do you get somebody like Putin to admit that he made a colossal mistake, a human mistake, an ethical mistake, a political mistake in starting this war? This is very, very difficult. But in terms of what would the solution look like? Very simple. The Russians go home. End of story.
Do you believe in the power conversation between leaders to sit down as human beings and agree? First of all, what home means, because we humans draw lines.
That's true. I believe in the power of conversation. The big question to ask is where. Where do real conversations take place? And this is tricky. One of the interesting things to ask about any conflict, about any political system, is where do the real conversations take place? And very often they don't take place in the places you think that they are. But think about American politics. When the country was founded in the late 18th century, people understood holding conversation between leaders is very important for the functioning of democracy. We'll create a place for that. That's called Congress. This is where leaders are supposed to meet and talk about the main issues of the day. Maybe there was a time, sometime in the past, when this actually happened. When you had two factions holding different ideas about foreign policy or economic policy, and they met in Congress, and somebody would come and give a speech, and the people on the other side would say, hey, that's interesting. I haven't thought about it. Yes, maybe we can agree on that. This is no longer happening in Congress. I don't think there is any speech in Congress that causes anybody on the other side to change their opinion about anything. So this is no longer a place where real conversations take place. The big question about American democracy is there a place where real conversations which actually change people's minds still take place? If not, then this democracy is dying also. Democracy without conversation cannot exist for long. And it's the same question you should ask also about dictatorial regimes. Like you think about Russia or China. So China has the Great Hall of the People. And the representatives, the supposed representative of the people meet every now and then, but no real conversation takes place there. A key question to ask about the Chinese system is, behind closed doors, let's say in a Politburo meeting, do people have a real conversation? If Xi Jinping says one thing and some other big shot thinks differently, will they have the courage, the ability, the backbone to say, with all due respect, I think differently, and there is a real conversation? Or not? I don't know the answer. But this is a key question. This is the difference, between an authoritarian regime can still have different voices within it. But at a certain point, you have a personality cult. Nobody dares say anything against the leader. And when it comes again to Ukraine and Russia, I don't think that if you somehow manage to get Putin and Zelenskyy to the same room, when everybody knows that they are there and they'll have a moment of empathy or human connection, and they'll have I don't think it can happen like that. I do hope that there are other spaces where somebody like Putin can still have a real human conversation. I don't know if this is the case. I hope so.
Well, there's several interesting dynamics, and you spoke to some of them. So one is internally with advisors. you have to have hope that there's people that would disagree, that would have a lively debate internally. Then there's also the thing you mentioned, which is direct communication between Putin and Zelensky in private, picking up a phone, rotary phone, old school. I still believe in the power of that. But while that's exceptionally difficult in the current state of affairs, what's also possible to have is a mediator like the United States or some other leader, like the leader of Israel or the leader of another nation that's respected by both, or India, for example, that can have, first of all, individual conversations and then literally get into a room together.
It is possible. I would say more generally about conversations is it goes back a little to what I said earlier about the Marxist view of history. One of the problematic things I see today in many academic circles is that people focus too much on power. They think that the whole of history or the whole of politics is just a power structure. It's just struggle about power. Now, if you think that the whole of history and the whole of politics is only power, then there is no room for conversation. Because if what you have is a struggle between different powerful interests, there is no point talking. The only thing that changes it is fighting. My view is that no, it's not all about power structures. It's not all about power dynamics. Underneath the power structure, there are stories in human minds. And this is great news. If it's true, this is good news, because unlike power that can only be changed through fighting, stories can sometimes, it's not easy, but sometimes stories can be changed through talking. And that's the hope. I think, in everything from couple therapy to nation therapy, if you think it's power therapy, it's all about power, there is no place for a conversation. But if to some extent it's the stories in people's minds, if you can enable one person to see the story in the mind of another person, and more importantly, if you can have some kind of critical distance from the story in your own mind, then maybe you can change it a little. And then you don't need to fight. You can actually find a better story that you can both agree to. It sometimes happens in history. Again, French and Germans fought for generations and generations. Now they live in peace, not because, they found a new planet they can share between France and Germany, so now everybody has enough territory. No. They actually have less territory than previously because they lost all their overseas empires. But they managed to find a story, the European story, that both Germans and French people are happy with. So they live in peace.
I very much believe in this vision that you have of the power of stories. And one of the tools is conversations. Another is books. There's some guy that wrote a book about this power of stories. He happens to be sitting in front of me, and that happened to spread across a lot of people. Now they believe in the power of story and narrative, even a children's book too. So the kids, I mean, it's fascinating how that spreads. I mean, if underneath your work, there's an optimism. And I think underneath conversations is what I try to do is an optimism that it's not just about power struggles. It's about stories, which is like a connection between humans and together kind of evolving these stories that maximize happiness or minimize suffering in the world.
And this is why I think I admire what you're doing, that you're going to talk with some of the most difficult characters around in the world today. And with this basic belief that by talking, maybe we can move them an inch, which is a lot when it comes to people with so much power.